Shwmai a croeso. Welcome to the Temple of History. In today's video we'll be looking at my channel's first ever account, which is Captain Henry Morgan's attack on Panama in the 17th century. The source chosen for this account is The Buccaneers of America by Alexander Olivier Exquemelin, who served as a surgeon barber in most, if not all, of the buccaneering ventures up to 1672. His account is considered essential reading for this topic and period because of his likely proximity to the events and his detail in the accounts. Such accounts are always clouded by drama, taste, and simply word-of-mouth memory, but nevertheless they remain vital in understanding the history of the Caribbean and South Sea region. The Welsh buccaneer captain Henry Morgan had been pillaging across the Spanish West Indies during the 1660s and later decided to attack one of the largest cities in the Darien region, Panama City. He departed from the castle of Chagre towards the city on the 18th of August 1670, bringing with him 1,200 men, 5 boats with artillery, and 30 canoes for transportation. After a 10-day march which nearly saw the buccaneers defeated through starvation, desperately eating leather, dry maize, leaves, herbs, and even grass, they finally arrived near the city. They had been saved only by the discovery of cattle, horses, and donkeys on the islands of Tavoga and Tovagilla, quickly slaughtering and roasting them on fires, barely waiting for them to be cooked before eating them. Here, Exquemelin stated that they more resembled cannibals than Europeans, the blood many times running down from their beards to their waists. It's a gruesome and vivid image conjured up by Exquemelin, but his reference to them as cannibals is an interesting one. By feasting on animal flesh in desperation, their animal-like or savage mannerisms are seen as almost de-Europeanizing them. This attitude was common during the period, with non-white ethnicities being frequently othered, and he was likely taking measures to distance himself from this buccaneering group. On a wider note, however, it is important to note just how unprepared for their journey they were, being nearly defeated by a lack of food. Before the buccaneers marched on the city, they prepared themselves in good order and sounded trumpets and drums to inspire their men and put fear into the Spanish. They marched down the main road before the city when Morgan was advised by one of their guides to take a more difficult route that would avoid any ambushes laid by the Spanish. He decided to do so, forcing the Spanish to move from their positions and engage them directly. The advice given by this guide demonstrated their reliance on them for navigating the Caribbean and the South Sea regions, with them often being indigenous American. Their disastrous journey to the city of Panama was largely saved by the guidance of such experts, and it is almost a certainty that European explorers, pirates, and other groups would have failed without such help. With the advice heeded and the buccaneers ready to fight, the Spanish fielded 2 squadrons, 4 regiments of foot soldiers, and bulls that were driven by indigenous Americans and Africans. Standing atop a small hill looking out over the city and the governor's forces, a sense of fear overcame the buccaneers. Exquemelin stated that part of their fear came from the fact that it was unlikely that they would be offered quarter given their conduct in the Spanish Main. It is likely that Morgan's men thought about this, as they were probably under no illusion that their conduct had often been brutal. The fact that Exquemelin, a former buccaneer himself, referred to their actions as cruelties is telling in itself. Nevertheless, the buccaneers formed 3 battalions and sent 200 of their best gunners as a vanguard. The skirmish, or small battle, took place on a rare occasion where an open field was used. This field was soft and full of quags, according to the source, so that when the Spanish cavalry launched their first attack, they were unable to hit the buccaneers on their flanks. With a steady knee to the ground, Morgan's men opened fire, sending the cavalrymen into disarray. The Spanish foot tried to follow the cavalry in an attack, but they too were swiftly defeated. In the chaos of the battle, smoke would have almost certainly have created a fog around the combatants. Coupled with the noise of the guns and men shouting, the Spanish bulls fled the battlefield in fear, with the few that did hit their lines being quickly shot. The battle lasted for about 2 hours, with most of the Spanish cavalry having been killed and the remaining fled. The foot soldiers, seeing their cavalry decimated, fired their muskets and fled too, dropping their weapons on the ground. Here we encounter the darker side of these buccaneers, as the account claimed that many of the soldiers that could not flee tried to hide in the shrubbery along the coast, but were found and executed. Some religious men also begged for their lives, but Captain Morgan ordered them to be shot with pistols. This brutality demonstrates the terrible nature of early modern warfare, particularly when bands of men seeking their fortune were able to so easily raid and pillage lands that they considered to be held by enemies. The execution of the religious men also hints at a conflict of faith, the Spanish being Catholic, and may have added to the buccaneers' sense of justification. Once again, Exquemelin's highlighting of these atrocities is also likely an attempt to distance himself from any of them. He was almost certainly keeping up with the times, understanding that buccaneers, or pirates, were becoming unfashionable in the eyes of Western Europeans. A captured captain revealed that the city's forces consisted of 400 cavalry, 24 companies with 100 men per company, 60 indigenous Americans and some Africans, the two latter groups being tasked with driving the bulls. The main road leading to the city was defended by a fort armed with 8 brass guns and 50 men. Trenches and batteries were also raised in and around the city, with more guns being ready to take on the pirates. The buccaneers had sustained significant losses, but they had killed 600 Spanish troops, besides many more wounded. After a brief rest, it was decided that they would march on the city and take it, with the source claiming romantically that they swore on their oaths to one another to fight to the last man. It was to be victory or defeat. With their earlier journey in mind, the fight for Panama was likely essential to their survival, for if they were unable to take the city, then starvation or a follow-up attack may well have occurred. This would help explain why they attacked such a heavily fortified position, knowing that they would face heavy fire. Morgan's men were fired upon by the city's guns with grape shot and iron scraps as they made their final assault. Many men fell dead as the Spanish defenders fired constantly in desperation, no doubt motivated by the unlikelihood of quarter being granted to them. After a fierce fight that lasted 3 hours, the Spanish defenders had been killed. The city had been taken. The city had many warehouses inside its walls, and goods such as cloth, linen, silks, and other goods were now booty for the buccaneers to plunder. Despite the inhabitants removing many of their possessions, there were plenty for them to take. It is likely that the warehouses were unable to be moved due to practical reasons, or the city's merchants felt that their numbers and defences would win the day. Morgan apparently ordered his men not to drink the city's wine, claiming it to have been poisoned. However, the source claimed that he did this out of fear of his men resorting to extreme behaviours, but also to keep them battle ready in case of a counterattack. Fears about the unruliness of these men play into stereotypes about piratical groups of the period and beyond, but the men were clearly desperate to take their share of the prize after so many of them had fallen. The city of Panama was set on fire soon after its capture and faced widespread looting by the buccaneers. It is a striking account that has cemented Captain Henry Morgan as the great buccaneer of the 17th century. It reveals to us both their cruelty and resolve in the face of adversity, especially when faced by a group which they deemed to be their enemies. It also reveals the weaknesses of Spanish New World forces during the period, who despite having vastly superior numbers and a strong defensive position, were brushed aside by a more determined and skilled opponent. Such accounts are lavish in the style of the day, but regardless are of great importance in understanding their lives. With that video done, the channel's first historical account has been covered. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it was informative, and I would be really interested to hear the thoughts of anybody who watched this video. What do you make of the account? And do you have any interesting thoughts on Captain Henry Morgan? If you do want to like and subscribe, I'd be very grateful. And on that note, I'll say Hwyl fawr, goodbye.